After losing the court case to my husband, I walked toward the clinic carrying my unborn twins, feeling the weight of betrayal like a stone in my chest. Every step was haunted by the knowledge that the man I once trusted had orchestrated a world that threatened not just my life, but the lives of the children I carried. I discovered the shadows behind his empire, his sister Elena, the silent architect of deception, and realized that to survive, I had to play a game of patience, observation, and calculated strikes. Each move I made pulled at the threads of their control, exposing cracks in their carefully constructed world. And when the final revelation came, I transformed heartbreak and fear into quiet power, reclaiming my agency and securing a future for myself and my twins. This is my story of betrayal, strategy, and the silent victory that only comes to those who watch, wait, and act with precision. My name is Clara. And on the morning I lost everything, Florida's sun was unbearably bright, as if the sky was mocking me for believing justice had a place in my story. I remember stepping out of the courthouse, the glass doors closing behind me with a soft hiss, like a quiet, satisfied laugh. That sound has echoed in my bones ever since. It felt like the whole building exhaled relief that I had failed. My ex-husband now stood on the steps below, surrounded by press and attorneys who treated him like he was the one who had been wronged. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His victory radiated from every polished inch of him. That's the funny thing about betrayal. It never screams, it whispers, and when I walked down those courthouse steps, carrying my unborn twins inside me, every whisper inside my heart asked the same question. What now, Clara? The answer, at least that morning, was a clinic. A final, fragile resignation. But fate has a strange sense of timing. And I was moments away from realizing that my story wasn't ending. It was waiting. The judge's words still sat thick on my tongue. His tone had been polite, measured, almost apologetic as he awarded my husband the upper hand. The custody arrangements, the financial divide, the subtle implication that my emotional stability was in question. They made me feel like a stranger to my own life. My husband's legal team was meticulous, rehearsed, well-funded. Mine was sincere but outmatched, a reminder of how uneven the battlefield truly was. The worst part wasn't losing. The worst part was knowing the case had been decided long before the gavel fell. As I walked away from the courthouse, the Florida heat clung to my skin, sticky, heavy, the kind of heat that makes you feel watched. My twins shifted inside me, tiny reminders of my responsibility and my failure. I wrapped an arm around my stomach. A reflex, a shield, an apology. The clinic wasn't far. A 15-minute walk. Long enough to think, but short enough to keep me from backing out. But halfway down the block, something pulled me to a stop. A strange feeling, like someone breathing on the back of my neck. Not fear, not intuition. Something else. Something colder. I looked back. My husband was gone from the courthouse steps, but his attorney Robert was still there, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. He lifted his phone to his ear and smiled. Not at me, at the ground. Like he just checked off a box on a private to-do list. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, but I didn't know it yet. I walked 1 block, 2, 3. Florida's palm trees cast long shadows across the sidewalk, slicing the heat into ribbons of light and darkness. A metaphor too dramatic even for my current misery, but accurate. Every few steps, my breath hitched. From the pregnancy, from the weight of the verdict, from the quiet, humiliating realization that I had been outplayed. I pressed a hand against the small of my back, steadying myself. Cars passed. People passed. No one looked at me long enough to wonder why a pregnant woman was walking with a shake in her step and a storm in her eyes. I envied their ignorance. But ignorance is rarely an accident. Sometimes it's a luxury. Sometimes it's a choice. I was 2 blocks from the clinic when a black SUV slowed beside me. Tinted windows. Unmarked plates. Quiet engine. Too quiet. And I realized something chilling. I had seen that same SUV at least 3 times that week. It matched my pace. Not aggressively. Not obviously. Just enough. The passenger window lowered an inch. Just enough for the barrier between me and the unknown to break. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. Fear wasn't foreign to me. But this wasn't fear. It was recognition. Someone was closing in. The window lowered another inch. And then another. And then, a gust of air burst outward, carrying a familiar scent. Cologne. Not just any cologne. My husband's. That was when I stopped walking. It was also when the SUV accelerated and disappeared around the corner, smooth, quiet, calculated. Someone wanted me to know they were there. But not who they were, not yet. By the time the clinic came into view, my heartbeat had steadied into something cold and rhythmic. Not panic, not sorrow, purpose. But as I stepped closer, a group of protesters blocked part of the walkway. Not the aggressive type, just people with signs, soft chants, and eyes that followed every movement. I felt a strange pressure behind my ribs. Not judgment. Recognition. One of them stared at me too long, like he knew me. Like he had seen me before. And then he reached into his pocket. My breath froze. His hand emerged holding a crumpled photograph. He didn't show it. He didn't speak. But his eyes told me enough. He wasn't a protester. He was waiting. For me. Then he whispered so softly I barely heard it beneath the Florida breeze. "You're making a mistake, Clara. He wants you to go inside." The man's whisper clung to the air long after the sound itself faded. "You're making a mistake, Clara. He wants you to go inside." The clinic's glass doors stood 3 steps away, sterile, reflective, waiting. But all I could look at was the man holding the folded photograph between 2 fingers, the paper trembling ever so slightly. Not from fear. From intention. Florida's heat swirled around us, thick enough to trap even the smallest truths. And the truth was this: I didn't know him. At least, not in any world that made logical sense. No connection. No shared history. No thread I could pull on. So why did he speak like someone who had been rehearsing that sentence? Why did he sound relieved to finally say it? He kept the image facing him, folded into quarters, old creases almost splitting the edges. A picture so handled, it was either treasured or feared. Maybe both. My voice didn't come immediately. It hid behind my teeth, behind the tension building at the base of my skull. When it finally appeared, it was barely a whisper. "What is that?" He didn't answer, not verbally. Instead, he turned the photograph in his hand just enough for sunlight to skim across the glossy surface. I saw only a corner. A sliver of something. A flash of ocean blue fabric and a hand, possibly mine, resting on a table. My heart jerked. It could have been a coincidence. A trick of the light. A misinterpretation from a desperate mind. But instinct, the same instinct that had warned me about the SUV moments earlier, tightened its grip around my spine. He knew something. Something about me. Something about him. Something about all of this. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. He simply looked at me like a man who had crossed too many lines to turn back. "I'm someone," he said softly, "who owes you the truth. Not I owe you something. Not I owe you help. The truth." A word my husband had always avoided unless he could weaponize it. Before I could respond, one of the clinic volunteers approached us mid-40 seconds, navy scrubs, polite smile masking discomfort. "Ma'am? Are you okay? Do you need assistance going inside?" Her eyes flicked toward the man, then back to me. She recognized danger, even if she couldn't name it. And for the first time that morning, I realized how precarious my position truly was. I had a stranger with a photograph, a husband with a watching SUV, a clinic with decisions I wasn't ready to make, and twins, quiet, fragile twins that forced every thought to split into 2. I nodded to the volunteer, though I never took my eyes off the man. "I'm fine," I lied. "I just need a minute." She hesitated, then walked back toward the clinic entrance, holding the door open as if inviting me to safety. But safety, the real kind, wasn't inside that building. I felt it deep, bone deep. The clinic was exactly where he wanted me to be. Whoever he was. The man exhaled slowly, the sound almost drowned out by traffic. "Clara," he murmured, "listen to me carefully. If you walk into that clinic, you will never get out of this story alive. Alive. Not safe, not whole. Alive." The phrasing chilled me. Not because it meant physical danger, though that was possible, but because it meant something more insidious. A choice I made today could erase the rest of my future. "You think my husband sent me here?" I asked, testing him. His jaw tightened. The kind of tightening that comes from seeing too much, knowing too much, carrying too much. "I think," he said carefully, "your husband is not who you believe he is. And that clinic is not what you think it is." The world around us blurred, traffic dulling, voices fading, even the heat becoming muted. It was just him, me. And the said, "What's in the photo?" I pressed. His fingers twitched around the folded paper. "I'll show you," he answered. "But not here." He glanced toward the SUV's last known direction, then toward the clinic, then at my stomach where my twins rested. "You're being watched," he whispered. "More closely than you realize." My pulse hammered. Of course I was being watched. By lawyers. By judges. By strangers. By my husband. But this was something different. More organized. More curated. More deliberate. The man finally unfolded the photograph. Just enough for me to see the image clearly. It was me. Pregnant. Smiling. Sitting beside a man who was not my husband. A man I had never seen before in my life. My breath didn't just freeze, it suspended, weightless, like it had abandoned my lungs entirely. The date printed on the bottom corner wasn't just wrong. It was impossible, taken months before I was even pregnant. How? The word cracked, not from fear, but from the absurdity of what I was seeing. The man closed the photograph again before anyone else could glimpse it. "It doesn't matter how," he murmured. "It matters who." And I knew exactly what he meant. My husband was a man of photographs. He believed lies more readily when he could frame them. He believed manipulation was cleaner when it came with timestamps. He believed the world was easier to control when he had evidence even fabricated to break anyone who threatened him. But this was more sophisticated than anything he had done before. A manipulation so precise it felt personal. Why? Why fabricate a photograph like this? Why create a false narrative? Why now? I pressed a trembling hand against my stomach. My twins shifted. And suddenly, I wasn't just scared. I was furious. Quietly furious. The kind of fury that doesn't scream, it calculates. The man lowered his voice even more. "Because the court case you lost?" It was only the opening move. Opening move. A chess term. A strategy term. A word my husband had used too many times when discussing negotiations, deals, and worse people. "I can't help you if you walk inside," the man continued. "And your husband is counting on the fact that you will." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Why would he want that? He looked at me with something like pity. "For the same reason he wanted you exhausted during the trial. For the same reason he leaked half-truths about your mental state. To break your credibility. To break your custody. To break your will." Custody. The word sliced me open. He wasn't just trying to win the court case. He was trying to erase me. My existence. My future. My maternal rights. Everything, and I had almost let him. Before I could ask another question, the man stiffened, eyes narrowing. Because the black SUV had returned. Slowly. Quietly. Turning the corner with surgical precision. Headed straight toward us. "Move," the man muttered. He grabbed my elbow, not painfully but urgently, and guided me away from the clinic entrance. We crossed the sidewalk in a diagonal line, slipping into the narrow alley beside the building. Trash bins, peeling paint, a service door humming faintly. Not glamorous, not safe, but hidden. The SUV glided past the sidewalk we had just abandoned, windows rolled just low enough to show silhouettes inside. Watching, searching. I pressed my back against the warm brick wall, my heartbeat sinking with the thrum of machinery from the service door. The man positioned himself slightly ahead of me, shielding me from view. "Why are they following me?" I whispered. "They aren't following you," he said. "They're tracking you." My stomach dropped. "Through what?" He didn't answer with words. He pointed at my wrist, at the delicate silver bracelet my husband had given me 3 months ago. A bracelet I never removed because it made me feel remembered, cherished, loved. But hearing the truth, it felt like a shackle. "There's a microchip inside," he murmured. "Not GPS short range, more discreet." My skin crawled. That bracelet had been his court reconciliation gift. An attempt to show unity, he said. I had worn it to every hearing, every mediation, every lawyer meeting. My husband had known where I was at every moment. He had known I would come to the clinic. He had known I would do it alone. And worst of all, he had counted on it. I stared at the metal band. The way sunlight slid across it like a dangerous secret. It wasn't tight. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't alarming. But it was betrayal, smooth, polished, engineered betrayal. "Take it off," the man said. I hesitated for only a moment before unclasping it. The metal clicked open. A quiet sound. too quiet. The moment it left my skin, I felt lighter. Not physically, emotionally. Like something that had been inside me, something controlling. Something monitoring finally disconnected. The man set the bracelet on top of a trash lid. Then he crushed it beneath his shoe. The sound was small. A crunch. A snap. A faint electrical sputter, but it felt monumental. A declaration. A shift. A beginning. But before I could breathe, before I could process anything, the man whispered, "Clara, I haven't even told you the worst part yet." The alley smelled of wet brick, old trash, and the faint metallic tang of electricity, the aftermath of crushed circuitry, I imagined. It should have been repulsive, but it felt oddly freeing. The bracelet was gone, the connection severed. And yet, I didn't feel safe. Not even close. Because freedom alone doesn't undo betrayal. He stood a few steps ahead, leaning against the wall, face half-shadowed, eyes scanning the street like a predator. A predator, yes, but not for me. Not entirely. For the man who thought he could control everything. "I need to know who you are," I whispered. A question that had lodged in my chest like a knife the moment I saw that photograph. The man exhaled, slow, deliberate. "I'm someone who has been following the same thread as you. Only in secret. I've watched him too. Not my husband. Not my lawyers. Not the press. Him." And suddenly, I realized this wasn't just about winning or losing a court case. This was about control. About manipulation so precise it left no room for human error. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folder, edges worn. Inside, papers, photographs, printouts of emails, little breadcrumbs, all pointing toward the same man I had married. He had built his empire not on wealth alone, but on foresight. On predictability. On the assumption that everyone else's life was a pawn to move. He slid one photograph toward me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was a picture of my husband standing over my desk in my own office during hours I had spent with my twins' ultrasound technician. Alone. Watching. Waiting. And the timestamp. Last week, the week of the court's final ruling. I sank against the wall, pressing the photograph to my chest as if it could shield me from the implications. He watched silently, letting the moment stretch. Because in silence, I felt the truth. Everything I thought I knew about him, about us, about the life I had built, was suspect. He spoke finally, his voice low, deliberate. "Clara, he's already planted doubts about you. About your competence, your loyalty, your ability to protect what's yours." I wanted to scream, to ask how he could betray so easily, to accuse the entire world of conspiracy. But instead, I just listened. And realized, I had been betrayed before I even knew it. I studied the photograph in my hands again. The office, the empty desk, the shadows. The sense that someone had been there not for work, not for oversight but for me. I had shared everything with him. My dreams, my fears, my plans. And he had weaponized them against me. Even now, the court case felt like the smallest knife in a drawer full of blades. A distraction, a minor incision before the deeper cut. He, my husband, had calculated everything. Every step, every sigh, every movement. And I hadn't even seen the first part of the plan. The stranger's voice pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. "Clara, you have to understand, the court was only the opening act. The real story begins now, and he's counting on you to walk right into it." I glanced at him, incredulous. "How do you know so much?" "Because I've been watching him for years," he said. "Because he trusts no one. But he trusts me. To know what you need to see. To survive." A shiver ran down my spine. Not fear. Anticipation. Suspicion. I had always assumed betrayal would be loud. Dramatic. Explosive. But this was quiet. Subtle. Calculating. Then he handed me another document. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just photographs this time. Emails, receipts, calendar entries, financial transfers, small, insignificant, barely noticeable. Until you notice the pattern. My husband had been funneling money, somewhere. Somewhere secret. Somewhere that had nothing to do with our family. I read each line slowly, letting the implications sink in. Money transferred late at night. Accounts I didn't know existed. Names I didn't recognize. Addresses I had never visited. Every detail. Innocuous alone. devastating together. The man leaned in, voice low. Clara, he's been building a life inside your life. A secret network, a hidden foundation. And you've been completely blind. Blind. Yes, I had been blind. And now I realized the depth of his manipulation. The court case. The media. The lawyer whispers. All a cover. All a distraction. The betrayal was bigger than me. Bigger than the twins. Bigger than the courthouse steps. He folded the documents and handed me a single business card. Not his. Not mine. My husband's. The address written on it. A location I had visited only once years ago. A place that no longer existed in my memory. He had planned for me to return there. To walk into something, unknowingly. My mind spun. Everything my husband had built, every deal, every smile, every polite handshake, had it all been a performance? Had I been living inside a lie the entire time? The man watched me carefully. You have to trust me, he said, voice barely audible over the faint hum of the alley. Because if you don't, he wins before you even start. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in months, a flicker of control. A small spark of power, not from him, from me. Even in betrayal, even in suspicion, even in fear. I had a choice. I nodded once. A decision. A silent promise. Then I looked up. The SUV was back. Parked at the corner of the alley. Engines off. Windows dark. He knew we were here. He was watching. By the time we left the alley, the Florida sun had begun to lower, stretching shadows across the cracked sidewalks. I walked in silence, clutching the folder of evidence and photographs, feeling the weight of betrayal in every step. The man beside me, this stranger who knew more than anyone should, was quiet too. Not protective, not condescending, just present. A shadow companion in the theater of my unraveling life. I realized then how fragile the world can feel when every certainty you've held dissolves into doubt. We stopped at a small, nondescript cafe a few blocks from the clinic. I needed to sit. To process. To breathe. The stranger bought 2 coffees, placing one gently in front of me. The steam rose, blurring my vision. I stared into it like it could offer answers, or at least a momentary reprieve. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the folder across the table and demand the universe explain itself. But the truth is, sometimes anger is a luxury you can't afford. Especially when heartbreak tastes this precise. I had loved him. Not blindly. Not naively. But fully. And now I realized that the man I thought I knew had been performing from day one. Every gesture. Every promise. Every smile. A meticulously scripted lie. And I had applauded it. I opened the folder again. Photographs, emails, financial records, phone logs, each detail a fracture in the image of our life I had clung to. It was all there, proof that my husband had systematically undermined me, isolated me, and manipulated the court to appear the reasonable, devoted partner. And I had believed him. One photograph made me stop completely. It was taken at our home, in our living room. A hidden camera captured me talking on the phone to my attorney. Gestures, expressions, even a nervous laugh, all recorded. And the timestamp? The day before the trial began. He had watched me prepare. He had watched me strategize. And he had twisted it against me. I slumped into the chair, pressing my hands to my eyes. I could feel my twins shifting, tiny kicks reminding me that I wasn't alone in this storm. But even their presence couldn't shield me from the ache in my chest. Betrayal, I realized, doesn't just break trust. It fractures identity. It steals your sense of reality. I asked the stranger, almost without thinking, "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a hand over the folder. His voice was quiet, steady. "Because you're the only one who can stop him. But first, you need to see him clearly." I nodded, though my throat felt raw. Seeing clearly. That sounded almost cruel. Because clarity is often the sharpest blade of all. We didn't speak much after that. Words felt inadequate. Instead, we sat, side by side, letting time stretch between sips of coffee. The street outside hummed with oblivious life, children laughing, cars passing, birds screaming into the fading light. All while my world, meticulously crafted by the man I married, collapsed quietly beneath me. I thought about every moment he had smiled at me. Every "I love you," whispered across the bedroom. Every reassuring hand on my shoulder. All lies. And yet, It wasn't rage that consumed me first. It was grief. Deep, hollow, suffocating grief. Then the stranger slid one final photograph toward me. Not a document. Not an email. Not a financial record. Just a single frame. It was my husband, laughing. With a woman I didn't recognize. And 2 children, twins who were not mine. The same age as my unborn twins. I dropped the photograph on the table. The edges curled from the heat of the coffee. My chest ached in a way that made breathing an effort. He had been living a double life. A secret world. And somehow, he had planned for me to never discover it. I pressed my palms to my stomach, feeling the small life inside me, my unborn twins. The thought of them hurt more than anything. Because my husband's betrayal wasn't just against me. It reached them, even before they existed. And in that moment, heartbreak became the fuel for something else. Not revenge. Not yet. But awareness. Vigilance. A slow, quiet calculation. The stranger spoke, voice low, deliberate. He isn't finished. He thinks this is the end of the story. I realized. It wasn't the end. It never had been. I looked at him, this mysterious ally, and felt something stir beneath the weight of despair. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was focus, cold, precise, ruthless. I wouldn't let him break me. I wouldn't let him touch my twins. And I wouldn't let this story end with him triumphant. But to fight him, I needed to understand him first. And then, quietly, he said, "There's one person left. One who can help you see everything. But finding them will change everything you think you know." The night had fallen over Florida, folding the streets into shadows that felt almost protective. The stranger led me to a small, dimly lit office hidden behind an unmarked door. Inside, the air was heavy with paper, dust, and secrets that smelled like power. I placed the folder on the table, careful not to spill its contents. Every photograph, every email, every financial record had become a map of betrayal. And now it was time to follow it to the source. Because the source was him. The stranger gestured toward a wall covered in photographs, post-its, and lines of string connecting faces, places, and transactions. It was intricate, beautiful, almost like a predator's mind made visible. "This," he said, pointing, "is what he built while you were distracted by courtrooms, custody hearings, and the false narrative he fed the world. All of it a performance to keep you occupied." I leaned in. Each string led somewhere. Each photograph revealed a piece of a puzzle I had never imagined existed. Accounts, offshore transfers, shell corporations, hidden properties, and in the middle of it all, my husband, smiling, calculating, untouchable. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had weaponized the system against me. And every move I had made had been anticipated. The stranger pulled out a document marked Custody Manipulation Plan in my husband's handwriting. My breath caught. It outlined how to discredit me in court, how to exploit my pregnancy, how to make my twins seem better off, under his control. Every detail of my life had been weaponized. Even before I realized it, I was already playing by his rules. He slid another photograph across the table. My eyes widened. It was my husband holding one of the twins from another relationship, a child not mine, in a room that mirrored my own nursery. And the caption in his handwriting? "Practice for custody, do it perfectly." He had been preparing for me to fail. Not accidentally, not opportunistically. Deliberately, calculated, systematic. The truth hit like a blade. My children, my unborn twins, were already part of a plan I hadn't even seen coming. I pressed my hands to my face, then slammed them onto the table. The sound echoed sharp and satisfying. Anger flared. Not the fleeting anger of annoyance. Not the polite anger of courtroom debates. The kind that burns cold and precise. The kind that sharpens every thought into strategy. I had been heartbroken. Now I was enraged. And that rage could be turned into something deadly. Quietly, meticulously deadly. The stranger opened a small drawer, pulling out a USB drive. "This," he said, "contains emails proving collusion with your lawyers, the judge's clerks, and even your own friends. They all thought they were helping him. Or, maybe he made sure they did. Everything I trusted was a lie. Every ally could be a pawn." I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb the immensity of it all. He had not just betrayed me. He had rewritten reality. Every document, every photograph, every whispered word had been orchestrated to make me look weak, incompetent, unstable. The court case, a small act in his larger plan. The press, a tool for shaping public perception. Even my friends, my family, carefully guided to doubt me at key moments. I was surrounded by enemies, but none of them had to raise a hand. He had already done the work for them. Then, the stranger leaned in, voice barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights. "Clara, he's planning one final move. One that will take everything from you. Your twins. Your home. Your life. And he thinks you won't see it coming." I realized I had only scratched the surface. I stared at the wall of photographs, my mind mapping every connection, every lie. Anger fused with clarity. Grief fused with calculation. I understood now. I could mourn. Or I could plan. But I could not do both. I closed my eyes, feeling my twins shift inside me. Tiny reminders that I was not powerless. That my life and theirs was worth fighting for. And in that moment I made a choice. I would not just survive. I would reclaim every piece of what he tried to steal. The stranger slid a small, sealed envelope across the table. Inside was a key. And a note in my husband's handwriting. "If you open this, you will see everything. But beware. Once you know, there's no turning back." I realized I had just been handed the first step of my revenge. After leaving the office, I walked alone through the dim streets of Florida, the folder clutched tightly under my arm. The city's usual hum, the distant horns, the occasional laughter felt like a cruel soundtrack to my unraveling life. I had seen the web he had spun. Every document, every photograph, every hidden transfer a testament to his meticulous cruelty. And yet, it was silent now. The storm had passed, leaving only the debris of reality in its wake. And in that silence I had to confront something I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet: grief. The grief came quietly at first. A tightness in my chest, a pressure behind my eyes, a heaviness in my stomach that mirrored the weight of my unborn twins. I walked past streetlights, shadows stretching across the cracked pavement, thinking about the life I had believed I had. I had trusted him completely, shared my secrets, shared my heart, shared my future. And he had weaponized all of it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to disappear. But grief is strange. It can't be rushed. It can't be commanded. It must be endured. And endure I did. I paused in front of a small bridge overlooking the water. The reflection of streetlights danced on the surface, fractured like the truth I had just uncovered. And then, without warning, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You've seen the surface. The depth is darker. Meet me." Someone else knew. And they were waiting. I sank onto the edge of the bridge, pressing my hands against my face. It wasn't just the court. Not just the photographs. Not just the hidden children. It was the totality of it, the trust broken, the reality rewritten, the future stolen. Every moment of happiness I had believed in, gone. I felt my twins shift inside me, tiny reminders of life and hope amidst the wreckage. And I realized I couldn't let this destroy me. Not fully. After minutes or maybe hours I straightened my back. The grief was still there, but beneath it was something else: clarity. Cold. Calculated. Precise. He had underestimated me. He had assumed heartbreak would render me helpless. But heartbreak can sharpen focus, can crystallize thought, can ignite a slow-burning determination. I pressed my hand to my stomach. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for them. And that meant I needed a plan. The stranger appeared beside me, quiet as the shadows. "You felt the grief," he said. "Now it's time to channel it. But there's one problem." He held up a small envelope, stamped and sealed. "Your husband already knows what you've seen. And he's preparing his next move." I opened the envelope cautiously. Inside were 2 items. A list of contacts, friends, allies, legal associates he had ensured would be on his side. A single photograph of him smiling innocently in the courtroom, with a note scribbled on the back: "Don't let her think she can outmaneuver me." He wanted me afraid. He wanted me indecisive. He wanted me broken. And he had misjudged me. The stranger's voice broke through my thoughts. "You're thinking too small. You need to see the bigger picture." I nodded slowly, pressing my lips together. He was right. I couldn't just react. I had to anticipate. I had to calculate. The stranger handed me a small tablet. On it was a map, locations, timestamps, and financial trails. I traced my finger over the lines, realizing every move I had made, every court hearing, every visit to the clinic, he had accounted for. I wasn't just fighting a man. I was fighting a carefully constructed machine. And I was about to find its weak point. I leaned back, letting the cold metal of the bridge rail press against my shoulder. The water beneath reflected a fractured image of me, grief-stricken but beginning to harden. The first steps toward revenge were taking shape, quiet but deliberate. I had lost in the court, yes. I had been betrayed in every imaginable way. But losing here, now, that would be different. Not heartbreak, not despair, not manipulation, calculation, patience, strategy. The emotional fallout had done its work. Now the real work could begin. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Another text. They're moving against you tomorrow. Be ready. He wasn't just powerful. He was relentless. And now I was learning to match him. The night was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and leaves only your own thoughts echoing. I sat in my apartment, the folder of evidence beside me, the tablet from the stranger open on my lap. Lines of transactions, hidden locations, and carefully curated relationships formed a lattice across the screen. It was intricate. It was ruthless. And it was all my husband's work. But every machine has a flaw. Every empire has a weakness. And tonight, I intended to find his. I spread the documents across the table, connecting photographs with timelines, emails with locations. The stranger watched silently, letting me work. This is your life, he said finally. No one else can move the pieces for you. Not me, not anyone. I nodded. Cold fury settled into my chest, mingling with heartbreak and grief. Every detail mattered. Every observation could be leveraged. He had underestimated me. And that mistake would cost him. As I traced the financial trail, I discovered something unexpected. A series of anonymous donations traced back to my husband but funneled through a network of charities and shell corporations. And then a name repeated itself across several documents, one I recognized from my own past. Elena Marquez. She wasn't in the public eye. And yet, somehow, she was everywhere in his shadow world. He leaned over my shoulder, voice low. Clara, that name matters more than you realize. She's the reason he built everything the way he did. My mind raced. Was Elena a rival? A partner? A threat to him or to me? The stranger continued. Finding her isn't about confrontation. It's about information. Once you know her role, you can begin to predict his moves. Prediction. That word carried power. I realized that in order to fight, I needed to think like him. Cold. Calculated. Unemotional. I started listing everything I had at my disposal. Photographs, emails, financial records from the folder. The tablet with mapped locations and secret accounts. Knowledge of his routines, habits, and psychological patterns. The stranger, my ally, my shadow, my guide. And most importantly, my own mind. He had assumed I would react, I would panic, I would crumble. But I wouldn't. I would act. The stranger handed me a USB drive. It contains surveillance footage, he said. Not of him. Of everyone around him. His associates, his lawyers, even his friends. It will show you who is loyal, and who is expendable. I inserted the drive into my laptop. And as the first images loaded, I realized I was seeing him through a lens no one else had access to. The footage revealed subtle betrayals, a secretary meeting him in secret. A lawyer consulting him outside of court hours. Each image, each snippet of conversation, a confirmation that his empire was supported by people who believed in him blindly. But one image made me pause. A man in a dark suit leaving my husband's office carrying a small, black briefcase. He didn't notice the camera. But I did. And I would follow him. I found a series of emails on the drive. Correspondence between my husband and a location I hadn't known existed, a private warehouse near the outskirts of Florida. The subject line, tomorrow's shipment priority clearance. He was moving something. Something he didn't want me to see. And I was going to. I closed my eyes, letting the adrenaline and calculation settle. The grief, the heartbreak, the rage, they all merged into a single focus. Precision. The stranger spoke. Clara, you have to be patient. One wrong move, and he'll know. But one right move, and you'll shift the balance. I nodded, feeling the weight of every choice. Every observation mattered. Every calculation counted. I was no longer the woman who had walked to the clinic alone, carrying her unborn twins. I was a strategist now, and he would learn, too late, that the game had changed. I printed out the warehouse location and marked the entrances, exits, and security cameras. And then I noticed something chilling, a small symbol on the blueprint. It was the same symbol found on the correspondence with Elena Marquez. They were connected, and if I followed the thread, I would uncover everything. The night had thickened, shadows crawling along the streets like watchful predators. I approached the warehouse from the mapped route, keeping to the edges of the streetlights, letting every instinct guide me. The folder, the tablet, the surveillance drive, each piece of evidence weighed heavy in my bag. Every step was deliberate, measured, silent. I wasn't just walking toward a building. I was stepping into his world. And tonight, I would test its defenses. The warehouse loomed ahead, metal walls reflecting the faint glow of distant street lamps. I crouched behind a stack of crates, watching. 2 men patrolled the perimeter. Cameras swiveled methodically. Nothing overtly suspicious, but that was the point: predictability. It was a sign of confidence. And overconfidence. He assumed no one could penetrate this fortress. He assumed I would cower behind grief. I did not. I tapped the tablet, pulling up the security map. One blind spot near the north entrance. Small, narrow. Just enough for a woman who had learned to move in silence. I would use it. And he would never see me. I moved quietly, crouched low, shadows swallowing my movements. The cold air pressed against my face as I slipped past the blind spot, heart steady despite the surge of adrenaline. Inside, the warehouse smelled of oil, metal, and secrecy. Rows of crates lined the walls, obscuring vision. I could hear muffled voices in the distance. And then, a faint click. Someone was watching me. I froze, listening, footsteps approaching from behind. My pulse quickened. Not panic. Observation. The stranger had taught me well. I melted into the shadows, heartbeats counting each second, waiting for the right moment. And then, just as quickly, the footsteps receded. I was in. Undetected. I approached a stack of crates labeled with a symbol I had seen before, Elena Marquez's mark. Inside were boxes filled with documents, contracts, and ledgers. I rifled through them quickly, memorizing names, dates, and transfers. The scope of his deception was staggering. He had manipulated people, resources, and even my life itself to maintain control. And now, I held a small fragment of the truth in my hands. As I replaced the documents carefully, a voice came from the shadows. "Clara. I didn't expect to see you here." It wasn't him. It was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. And suddenly, my minor intrusion became a risk. I straightened, hiding the evidence in my bag, and met the figure's gaze. A moment of silence stretched between us, heavy with possibility and danger. They were loyal, but not beyond persuasion. I could see the hesitation in their eyes. I spoke calmly, measured. "You work for him. But he doesn't know everything. Not yet. And you could help change that." The figure's expression flickered. A small opening. A crack in the fortress. I had tested the defenses. I had found the weak point. And I had survived. As I slipped back into the night, the warehouse behind me silent once more, I glanced at my phone. A new message, unknown number. "You've been noticed. They know someone was there. Be careful. Time is moving faster than you think." He had noticed. And now the game had truly begun. The night was still, the Florida streets coated in a wet sheen from earlier rain. I moved with purpose, the folder, tablet, and newly acquired warehouse documents secured in my bag. Every step was deliberate, every glance calculated. I had infiltrated his space once, tested the waters, and now it was time to escalate. He assumed he controlled the narrative. But narratives can be rewritten. And tonight I was the author. Back in my apartment, I spread out every document I had gathered. Financial records, surveillance footage, emails, warehouse manifests, all interconnected threads. I circled names, drew arrows between locations, and marked potential weak points. The first phase wasn't confrontation. It was testing. A controlled disturbance to observe his response. To see which of his pieces moved independently, and which were bound too tightly to notice a shift. I selected my first target, A mid-level associate in his network, a man loyal enough to be trusted, cautious enough to make a mistake if pressured. I drafted an anonymous tip, careful not to leave a trace, and sent it. The tip was simple. Something isn't right. He's hiding something. Check the warehouse tonight. A tiny ripple. But ripples can become waves. I sat in a cafe across from the associates building, pretending to sip coffee, watching for any sign of response. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then, a figure exited the building, checking the street nervously. He was moving. He had received the message, and he was curious enough to act. This was the first proof that the web I had uncovered was alive. It reacted. It could be manipulated. The associate returned to the warehouse. I watched from a safe distance, noting his every step. Then a car pulled up. A lawyer I had traced in the USB footage stepped out. They entered together, unaware of the surveillance camera I had secretly positioned weeks ago. He thought the shadows belonged only to him. He was wrong. I analyzed every movement, every hesitant glance, every whispered conversation I could capture. Patterns emerged. Fractures, hesitations, overconfidence. The network wasn't unbreakable, it was human. I realized then that strategy isn't about brute force. It's about observation, subtlety, and precision. One carefully placed disruption could reveal loyalty, fear, and ambition. And that knowledge is power. I sent a second anonymous tip, this time targeting someone higher in the hierarchy, someone who could inadvertently expose a secret transfer my husband had orchestrated. Minutes later, the tablet pinged with new footage, a confidential meeting disrupted, whispers of suspicion, and the first cracks appearing. The game had begun. And the first pieces were moving exactly as I had predicted. Even as I observed, calculated, and manipulated, I felt a cold thrill, not for revenge yet. Not for satisfaction, but for the clarity of control. For the first time since the betrayal, I wasn't reacting. I was directing. And every misstep they made brought me closer to understanding him, closer to dismantling his empire from the inside. The grief, heartbreak, and anger had transformed into a razor-sharp focus. Every decision counted. Every observation mattered. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A single message. No sender. He knows someone is testing him. He's already countering. He was aware. And now the stakes had escalated. The storm had passed, leaving Florida streets glistening under the pale glow of streetlights. I had spent hours mapping movements, tracing emails, and observing reactions to the anonymous tips I had sent. The network was vulnerable but incomplete. Something was missing. A piece I hadn't accounted for. And then I found it. I returned to my apartment, reviewing every photograph, every ledger, every surveillance clip. There it was, a hidden trail, buried beneath layers of transactions and false identities. The name Elena Marquez appeared again, but this time in a context I hadn't anticipated. Not just a contact. Not just a shadow operative. She was family. My breath caught. She was his sister. The one person who had been orchestrating the empire alongside him, invisible to everyone else. I pulled up a photograph from a private event. Elena, smiling beside my husband, their closeness undeniable. It wasn't just partnership, it was complicity. Everything I had thought I understood about him, about his motivations, needed to be rewritten. I traced communications between them over the years, encrypted messages, financial transfers, and coded notes. It became clear, Elena was the architect behind much of the deception, not him alone. She had provided the resources, contacts, and silent manipulation that allowed him to operate unchallenged. He was powerful. Yes. But without her, fragile. And that fragility could be exploited. As I dug deeper, I discovered something that made my stomach twist. A series of legal documents, hidden trusts, and adoption papers. He had planned to claim my unborn twins through the courts if I faltered. And Elena had been ready to enforce it. I pressed my hands to my stomach, feeling the twins shift. I realized then, this wasn't just about power. It was about taking everything from me before they even existed. The stranger appeared quietly in the doorway, observing me as I processed the information. "Clara," he said, "he isn't the final obstacle. She is. And she will move faster than you expect if you underestimate her." I understood immediately. My husband was the face of the empire. Elena was the backbone. Take down one, and the other retaliates. But take down the right one first. and the entire structure begins to crumble. I realized the scope of what I had just uncovered. Not only had I been betrayed by my husband, but his entire operation was family-run, loyal to each other, untouchable unless I found the right leverage. And that leverage might be me. I sank into the chair, letting the revelation settle. Anger, grief, shock, all mingled with a new feeling, clarity. Everything I had planned, the tips, the observations, the minor manipulations had been necessary but incomplete. I needed to rethink the strategy. I needed to anticipate moves I hadn't even imagined. And I needed to remember why I was doing this. For my twins, for myself, for the quiet reclamation of my life. The tablet pinged with a new notification, an email from an anonymous sender. Elena knows someone is probing. She will act soon. Move carefully. The game had changed. The stakes had doubled. And I was running out of time. The night air was thick, humid, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint smell of salt from the coast. I had spent days analyzing Elena's movements, her influence over the network, and her connections to my husband. Every detail mattered. Every decision could tip the balance. Tonight, I was no longer observing. Tonight I acted. I returned to the warehouse. This time not to hide in shadows but to stage a deliberate disruption. The security patterns I had memorized guided my movements. Cameras, blind spots, patrol rotations. Every step had been planned, every outcome anticipated. I wasn't reckless. I was precise. And this first strike wasn't meant to destroy. It was meant to test, to provoke, to expose weakness. I inserted a small device into the main terminal, triggering a series of subtle alarms only detectable within the network. The messages were cryptic, just enough to unsettle. Check the northern inventory. Something is off. I retreated into the shadows and waited. Minutes passed. Then movement. Staff scrambled toward the northern section, whispering, unsure. Elena's influence was evident even from afar. Her subtle gestures, commanding tone, and quick decisions controlled the flow. But cracks appeared. Hesitations, uncertainty. The first fissures in her carefully maintained control. I realized then that execution wasn't about immediate destruction. It was about revelation. From my hidden vantage point, I saw my husband arrive unexpectedly. He scanned the warehouse, confusion and irritation flickering across his face. He had anticipated minor disruptions but not a deliberate probe so close to the core. He was off balance. And when he's off balance, mistakes happen. I observed silently as tension rippled through the room. Staff whispered, schedules faltered, and Elena's calm facade cracked ever so slightly. I noted everything: body language, eye contact, subtle signs of stress. This was more than sabotage. It was psychological warfare. I was proving, silently, that I could infiltrate, manipulate, and escape without detection. And it terrified them more than any confrontation could. A subtle sound, the click of a door, the shuffle of papers caught my attention. A security guard approached the northern terminal, phone in hand. I held my breath. Would he notice the anomaly? Would he realize the first strike had come from someone closer than they imagined? The guard paused, looked around. Nothing. He moved on. The strike had worked. Unseen, undeniable, effective. I retreated to my car, heart racing, mind sharpening. The first strike had achieved more than disruption. It had demonstrated control. Not brute force, not confrontation, control. For the first time, I felt power, not explosive, not loud, but undeniable. A quiet assertion that I had the ability to shape events. I was no longer merely reacting. I was directing, and the first move had set the stage for escalation. As I reviewed the footage I had secretly captured during the strike, one image made me pause. Elena Marquez's expression, barely perceptible, betrayed recognition. She had felt the intrusion. And now she knew. She would act. The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the Florida clouds. The city felt quiet, almost complicit, as if it were holding its breath. I watched the screen in my apartment, replaying the footage from last night's strike. Every misstep, every hesitation, every subtle reaction was now my data, my advantage. And the consequences were already spreading. By mid-morning, emails and encrypted messages began circulating through the network. Confusion, subtle accusations, and miscommunications spread like wildfire. The minor disruption I had orchestrated had sown doubt. Elena, once untouchable, was now second-guessing every decision. He had assumed loyalty. He had assumed control. But the first domino had fallen and they hadn't realized it yet. A notification appeared on the tablet. A transfer of funds had been frozen, flagged as suspicious. The client initiating it? One of the closest allies my husband had trusted for years. I had triggered the first domino. And it was moving faster than I anticipated. I monitored communications with obsessive focus. Meetings postponed. Staff questioning each other. Subtle cracks appearing in every interaction. Elena's influence was still strong, but now diluted by uncertainty. Every hesitation was a thread I could pull. This was the power of subtlety. Small actions, carefully placed, could undermine an entire empire without firing a single shot. And it was intoxicating. A text from an unknown number arrived. He's realizing the empire is slipping. Elena suspects a leak. She's taking action tonight. The stakes had escalated. The dominoes were falling, but now I had to anticipate their counter-moves. I spent hours analyzing responses, body language, tone, timing. Every flinch, every hesitation, every pause was data. I could see Elena's panic growing, her calculated veneer cracking. And my husband, he was compensating, overcorrecting, making mistakes I hadn't seen in years. This was no longer observation. It was manipulation. A game of mirrors where every reflection revealed more than the last. And the first strike had revealed the entire house of cards. The tablet pinged again. A surveillance feed from one of the warehouses, an associate accidentally triggering a security alarm while checking inventory. Elena's voice could be heard. Sharp and commanding. Lock it down. Now. Everything must be accounted for. Panic had reached the core. And I was watching it unfold in real time. Even as I observed the chaos I had sown, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. Not vindictive. Not triumphant in a loud way. Empowered. Focused. In control. Every misstep, every faltering reaction was proof. I was no longer the woman walking alone, burdened by betrayal. I was the strategist now, the silent hand guiding the dominoes. And with each falling piece, my path to reclaiming what was mine became clearer. A final alert lit up the tablet, an internal message from Elena to my husband, urgent, panicked. We need to find the leak, now. Someone has already compromised the northern warehouse. It's just the beginning. And the chain reaction had begun. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and dust as I approached the familiar building that had once seemed untouchable. Tonight I wasn't entering to spy. I was entering to provoke. To confront. To watch the first cracks in the empire I had infiltrated widen into gaping fissures. I had spent months observing, planning, striking. Now it was time for their reckoning. I slipped into the shadows of the warehouse, moving silently. Two figures were arguing over paperwork near the northern section, my husband's lawyer and a mid-level associate. Voices sharp, gestures tense, frustration palpable. I stepped into the light, just enough to be seen. Not threatening but unmistakable. Are you aware this is being monitored? I asked softly, my tone controlled, precise. Both men froze. Recognition and fear flickered across their faces. The lawyer stammered, searching for words. The associate glanced toward the rear exit, panic in his eyes. I could see it all. The loyalty, the hesitation, the first undeniable signs of doubt. And I realized, confrontation didn't need violence. It only needed presence. I walked slowly among the crates, tracing the lines of power, observing every reaction. Elena had trained them for obedience, but the chain was breaking. Every whispered apology, every faltering glance, was data. I didn't threaten. I didn't raise my voice. I only existed in that space, a silent force reminding them that control was slipping. The first domino had fallen in their hearts as well as their operations. A sudden phone vibration drew my attention. A message from the stranger. He knows you're inside. He's coming. Time was accelerating. And I had to be ready. Moments later, the doors creaked. He entered, scanning the room, his calm facade slightly off-kilter. I met his eyes, steady, unwavering. I see you've been busy, he said. A casual remark, but tension threaded every syllable. He had underestimated me once. Not again. And the cracks I had observed weren't just among his staff. They were beginning to appear in him as well. Elena appeared behind him, her eyes narrowing as she took in my presence. A slight hesitation. A flicker of calculation. She had anticipated threats, but not me, not here, not like this. For the first time, I saw the human side of their empire: fear, uncertainty, fragility. And it thrilled me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I let their reactions speak for themselves. Every glance, every pause, every faltering word told me exactly what I needed to know. They were unraveling, not from force, not from threats, but from the quiet, unrelenting pressure of observation and intelligence. I was not just a victim of betrayal anymore. I was the catalyst for collapse. And I had the patience to see it through. As I stepped back toward the shadows, the husband spoke one final tense line. "This isn't over, Clara. You'll regret stepping into our world." I didn't flinch. I only smiled quietly. He had no idea. I had already won the first round. The night hung heavy, Florida air sticky and electric. Every move I had made, every subtle disruption, every observation, it had all led to this moment. The network was unraveling. Elena's control, once absolute, was fracturing. And my husband, he was teetering, unsure, vulnerable. It was time for the final shift. I had traced Elena's personal communications to a single hidden account, one she believed entirely private. And there it was, emails and messages exposing secrets far beyond the warehouse or financial networks. Not just her role, but evidence of my husband's true intentions. He had been planning to disappear with everything: my life, the twins, his empire, without leaving a trace. And Elena had been complicit. I leaned closer to the screen, heart steady, adrenaline focused. The emails contained one final, damning piece: a plan to falsely accuse me in a legal maneuver that would remove any claim I had to the twins. They had thought I wouldn't discover it. They had thought I was powerless. They had been wrong. I returned to the warehouse undercover, stepping into the room where Elena and my husband waited. The tension was palpable, a storm held in a single breath. I revealed the evidence calmly, methodically: documents, messages, transactions, all laid bare on the table between us. Not an accusation, not a plea. A truth undeniable. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's eyes widened. A flicker of fear, then calculation. She had underestimated me, completely. My husband's face fell, the calm arrogance replaced by disbelief. He realized in that moment that the game had shifted. And the player he thought weak was now in control. I watched them falter, decisions misaligned, emotions unmasked. Elena tried to regain composure, to assert dominance, but hesitation betrayed her. My husband tried to negotiate, but every word faltered under the weight of exposure. They were unraveling before my eyes. Not by brute force, not by rage, but by knowledge, precision, and timing. The empire they had built on fear, secrecy, and loyalty was collapsing quietly. Elena leaned forward, voice sharp, attempting to reclaim control. "You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable." I smiled, calm, unwavering. "I don't delay. I decide. And I've already decided. This is over." For the first time, I saw the fear I had waited for. The power had shifted. I gathered the evidence, leaving them to the realization of their defeat. No theatrics. No threats. Just the quiet, undeniable truth laid bare. The empire that had sought to control my life had underestimated me. The betrayal that had once left me broken had forged me into something stronger. And in that quiet, icy moment, I understood. The victory was mine. Silent, complete, empowered. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the final message pinged on my tablet. "The balance has shifted. Proceed carefully. The world has changed." It was confirmation. The game was over. But the quiet power I had reclaimed was only beginning. The Florida sun rose slowly, casting light over streets I had walked countless times. But everything had changed. The empire that once dominated my life through deception, betrayal, and fear had crumbled quietly. And in its absence, I found space. Space to think, to breathe, to rebuild. The aftermath isn't loud. It isn't chaotic. It's quiet. Deliberate. I returned to the apartment, unpacking the evidence and documents that had once felt like burdens. Now, they were tools. Proof of truth. Proof of survival. I contacted key allies, those who had been coerced, manipulated, or ignored, and offered them clarity, assurance, and protection. Some were skeptical, some fearful, but the shift in power had become tangible. They began to trust me. It was subtle. But trust is the foundation of power. A single phone call arrived. An old business partner, someone who had abandoned me during the betrayal. They spoke hesitantly, unsure, yet hopeful. "Clara," I heard. "Are you safe?" I realized then. Rebuilding wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about creating something stronger than before. I organized my notes, the evidence, and the contacts into a meticulous system. Every connection, every weak point, every insight was catalogued. Unlike before, I didn't seek revenge for vengeance's sake. I sought stability, foresight, and control. A silent empire built not on fear but on knowledge, strategy, and precision. And this empire, unlike theirs, could never be shaken by betrayal. A news alert flashed on my phone. Whispers of scandal, mysterious resignations, and financial discrepancies in my husband and Elena's circle. The ripple effect of my actions continued. Even from afar, my influence was reshaping their world. The consequences of betrayal were now theirs alone. I sat by the window, feeling the twins stir inside me. I placed a hand on my stomach, whispering promises. "I will protect you. I will build a life worth living. And nothing, not lies, not betrayal, will take it from us." In protecting them, I protected myself. And in protecting myself, I reclaimed my power. A message arrived from an unknown number, simple and unassuming. "The world has shifted. You've earned your peace, for now." Peace, for now. The calm after a storm is never permanent, but it is earned. And I had earned it with patience, strategy, and resilience. I reflected on the journey: heartbreak, betrayal, fear, grief, anger, and finally, quiet empowerment. Every step had been deliberate, every choice calculated. I had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but tempered. Not broken but whole. Not defeated, but in command. And the future, my future, was mine to shape. I opened my laptop, ready to begin the next chapter of life, and paused. A single email from a secure source: "There are still shadows moving. But you know what to do." The fight wasn't over. But the power had shifted. The Florida sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a golden hue across streets that had once felt suffocating. Everything had changed. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through patience, calculation, and observation. I had reclaimed what was mine, exposed deception, and reshaped the world around me quietly, deliberately. And in that silence, I found strength. I walked through the apartment, each room a reminder of survival and transformation. Once, I had been vulnerable, betrayed, and uncertain. Now, I was grounded, empowered, and aware of my own agency. The journey had been long: heartbreak, anger, strategic maneuvers, but every moment had shaped me into someone stronger. I understood now: empowerment is not loud or explosive. It is quiet, calculated, unseen until it manifests. I paused at the window, feeling the twins stir. Their lives were untouched by the chaos, preserved through patience and careful planning. And I vowed silently: I would protect them, guide them, and ensure they never faced the world without knowing strength. Life had taught me many lessons. Betrayal often comes cloaked in familiarity. Power resides not in force, but in observation and timing. Revenge is most effective when it is precise, quiet, and controlled. I had walked through betrayal and heartbreak, but I emerged tempered, not broken. And in doing so, I reclaimed not just my life, but my future. The quiet victory is the strongest victory. A subtle ping from my secure tablet. An update on the remnants of the network I had dismantled. No threat. Only confirmation. Everything was in place, balance restored. And my life, finally, was my own. I stepped outside, feeling the sun on my face and the soft breeze against my skin. Freedom was simple. Freedom was earned. Not through shouting or domination. Through strategy, patience, and understanding the rhythms of power. I would live carefully, deliberately, empowered by knowledge and tempered by experience. And I would walk forward not as a victim, not as someone defined by betrayal, but as someone who had mastered her fate. I glanced at my phone. A simple message from a loyal ally, secure, discreet. "The world recognizes your power now. And you know what to do." Yes. I knew. And I would continue to move forward, quietly, deliberately, empowered. The story ends here, not with chaos, not with vengeance, but with quiet, undeniable power. I had taken what was stolen, exposed the truth, and reclaimed my life. And as the twins stirred gently, I smiled. The past had shaped me, but it did not define me. The quiet victory is the truest form of triumph. Have you ever turned betrayal into strength, silence into power? Comment below if you've experienced your own quiet victory. Subscribe. Clara's journey may end here, but the lessons of patience, strategy, and empowerment can guide every one of us.